Hello. Tonight I'll be reading you a story from my treasury of fairy tales. These stories have been retold by Nick Ellsworth. The story we'll be reading tonight is called Puss in Boots. There once was a miller who had 3 sons. When the miller died, he left all he had to his 3 boys. The eldest son, he left the mill. To the middle son, he left his donkey. And to the youngest son, he left his cat. The youngest son was not very happy about this at all. "It's not fair," he moaned. "You can make money if you've got a mill, and you can make money if you've got a donkey. But how can I make money if I've only got a cat?" "Don't worry, master," said Puss. "You won't have to worry about anything. Just do as I ask." Puss asked his master to bring him a sack and a pair of boots to wear. Puss put on the boots and walked around proudly in them. "I look very fine in these," he thought. Then he put some barley into the sack with some fresh green leaves, and he left the sack in the middle of a field. After a while, lured by the delicious smell, some curious rabbits made their way into the sack, hoping for a bit of a feast. Puss, who had been hiding nearby, quickly pounced on top of the sack and tied up the top. The rabbits were trapped inside. Puss then walked up to the castle where the king lived. "I'd like to see the king," he said boldly to the sentry guard who was on duty. "Who shall I say wishes to see the king?" asked the sentry. "I am the servant of the Marquis of Carabas," said Puss. Once inside the castle, the cat offered the sack of rabbits to the king. "These are for you, your majesty, a present from my master, the Marquis of Carabas." The clever Puss was pretending that his real master, the miller's son, was a nobleman. "How nice," said the king. "Rabbit is delicious in stew. Please thank your master for me." A few days later, Puss caught some partridges in the sack and gave them to the king. "Partridge is wonderful when it's roasted," said the king. "Please pass my warmest regards on to your master." The next day, Puss had heard that the king's carriage was going to drive along a road running close to a river. Puss told the miller's son to take all his clothes off and jump into the water. By now, the miller's son realized that his cat was no ordinary cat and decided to do whatever he asked. Puss quickly hid his master's clothes behind a rock. When the carriage passed by, Puss leapt out in front of it, shouting, "Help! My master, the Marquis of Carabas, is drowning." The king ordered his carriage to stop and told his servants to help the miller's son out of the river. "My dear Marquis," said the king, "what a terrible thing to happen. You have been so kind to me with all your presents. Allow me to present you with some clothes." And he gave the miller's son the most beautiful clothes made out of satin and gold thread. The miller's son looked so handsome, the king's daughter fell in love with him right away. Meanwhile, Puss raced ahead to where some of the farmers were working in a field. If the king stops and asks you who owns this land, you must say that it belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you don't do this, bad things will happen to you. The farmers were so scared that they agreed at once. Then Puss ran up to some harvesters who were cutting corn and told them to do exactly the same thing. The harvesters were so scared that they too agreed. When the king's carriage stopped at the field where the farmers were working, the king leaned out and asked, "To whom does this land belong?" The farmers replied, "The Marquis of Carabas, sire." A little further up the road, the king's carriage stopped again opposite the harvesters. "Who owns these fields?" asked the king. "Why, the Marquis of Carabas, sire," said the harvesters. "This Marquis of Carabas must be a very rich man," thought the king. While all this was happening, Puss in Boots had run ahead to a large castle where a magician lived. The magician was the real owner of the land that the king had been driving through. "I hear that you can change yourself into anything you choose," said Puss to the magician. "Well, almost anything," said the magician proudly. "How about a lion?" asked Puss. "Oh, that's easy," said the magician, and instantly turned himself into a big, roaring lion. Even Puss was frightened and had to hide behind a chair. When the magician had turned back into a man, Puss said, "That was very scary, but lions are big. Could you change yourself into something small, like a mouse?" "Of course," laughed the magician, and instantly turned himself into a tiny mouse and scurried across the floor. That was a mistake. Clever old Puss chased him, caught him, and ate him all up. Just then, Puss heard the king's carriage rattling along the road to the castle. He ran outside to meet it. "Welcome to the home of my master, The Marquis of Carabas, said Puss as the carriage reached the front door. The king looked around at the huge castle and realized that he would find no better husband for his daughter. I know that my daughter already loves you, he told the miller's son. Would you do me the great service of agreeing to marry her? The miller's son had already fallen in love with the king's daughter, so agreed to the marriage at once. The happy couple were married shortly after, and Puss lived in a great comfort for the rest of his days. And that's the end of the story for tonight. Good night.